at ya, bad at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya, coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster, coming at ya, bad at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Wilfred Riley. And our guest this week is Karys Rhea. She is a producer at Epoch Times and a staunch fighter against anti-Semitism. Karys, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. Since I mentioned anti-Semitism, I guess we should just start by encapsulating the madness of the last few months and seeing where we are now. So we'll talk, I'm sure, about some of the things we've seen, but in the media, at least right now, you don't hear as much about it as you were watching the madness on college campuses. Maybe things are better. Maybe school's just out. But what would you say the climate and the tenor is right now as it relates?
Right. Well, that is true, but only because of one word: summer. People are not on campuses anymore.
That's all. They didn't fix anything. It's just summer.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at the list of anti-Israel groups that are going to be protesting the DNC. I mean, have you seen that list? There are hundreds of groups on there. It is insane. And just yesterday, I think it was, or maybe even today, time flies during the week for me, but I read about some group that went to the Columbia. What role did he play? Some sort of, I mean, not the chancellor, but some sort of executive role at Columbia. And they went to his house, I think, in Manhattan, and they threw crickets all over the place and sprayed red paint. I mean, there are things happening every day, but in terms of college campuses, it's quieted up. It's quieted up a little bit because there's just not as many people on campus.
Well, two things. Are they really anti-Semitic, or were they just acting out scenes from Exodus? I mean, I saw the hotel thing they did with Netanyahu, that these people are crazy. And the other thing is, and I'd love to hear what Will says about this. You said there's hundreds of organizations, and I don't condone any kind of hate. But how many flavors of Jew hate can you have? I mean, I'm not a fan of intersectionality, but can't they all just be in a I hate the Jews group? Why do they need 100? What is it that's different between one group's anti-Semitism and another group that they can't just be in one group? That's the crazy part. Right. Why are there so many?
Well, it's not like hating the Jews is the focus of every single one of those groups.
Oh, okay.
You have, I mean,
the group that has anti-Semitism at number 3 in their list of priorities can't really be in the group that has it as number 1, because that's just a little too much for them. While I agree, they're focused on it too much.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the names of these groups, I'm just making this up, but you have, something like the, feminist Asian collective, whatever, it's these kinds of groups, right?
And then the undertones are all the same.
The queer, indigenous, freedom, whatever it is, you can create your own list just off the top of your head. And I bet if you compared it to the actual list, you would have at least a few matches of groups.
Got you.
Of group names.
So Will, is she right? Is it just summer?
Well, yeah, I think that's the main thing when it comes to campus violence. Like, you can actually track what predicts violence and crime. Like, there's a really famous sort of short study that correlates murder with ice cream sales. So the reason for that is that as it gets hot, more people are outside partying and barbecuing, and people get shot. And similarly,
ice cream.
So, is this significant? Is it significant or like a small?
It's
significant.
It's a huge statistically significant effect.
It's not because of the ice cream. It just happens to be ice cream is sold at the same time.
Yeah. So this is actually a famous thing that I open up my stats class with. Like, one of the biggest correlations that's ever been seen is between the amount of like Baskin Robbins that's sold in cities that have one or two of them and the number of murders. And you ask people why that is, and they just come up with a bunch of explanations. And you say, well, it's heat. The correlation isn't equal to causation. First rule of statistics. And then you like pull down the board. But I mean, so like the same thing with rioting. Like, rioting actually declines in the summer a lot because so many riots are on campuses and the kids are just home. They're like working at Baskin Robbins. So I think that's the main reason. Like when you but in terms of like the more fun question you asked, which is like why are I think Karys already answered that kind of, but like why are there so many different groups that are out there screaming about the Jews? Couldn't they just be like, the Sig Heil Collective or something? There are two answers. One is that the left in general always has this problem to the point where there's actually a Monty Python skit about it that's set in Israel. But they keep naming all these radical revolutionary groups like, I'm a member of the People's Front for the Liberation of Judea. But
Right.
one thing we don't do on the People's Front for the Liberation of Judea is ever get along with the Judean People's Liberation Front. And if you ever like watch the 1960s, like the fall of Students for a Democratic Society and so on, it was shit like that. Like my mom actually was involved in some of that. But the second thing is like what you guys have said. These aren't necessarily like the group isn't called like Students for Jew Hate.
Right.
It's just that every group on the left is expected to share all of the same politics.
Right.
I really have never thought of a good name for this. Intersectionality doesn't quite do it, but it's like the idea that the coalition of the fringes, maybe Obama's term, but everyone is unified on one side that's not sort of a suit wearing white man or beautiful woman or something like this. It's everyone who's ever felt outcast, Muslims, feminists, gays, self-defined queers. So if you are a bisexual kinkster, like the BDSM Alliance was at one of these marches. Like
Right.
if you are bisexual and you like to party, you are expected to hate Jews. Like it's a weird thing, but like you can't be a quote unquote slut and also pro-Israel. And like flyers for events will tell you that. Like
Mhm.
Zionists not welcome,
Mhm.
E/ACC conservative tech bros not welcome. It's bizarre, but it's very real. And anyone who lives in a
Yeah.
big city has seen it.
Yeah, the Jews have gotten kicked out of the Dyke March
Oh,
many years in a row, right? Like anybody that's flying the rainbow, whatever it is, LGBTQ plus blah 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 flag with a Star of David on it, in many in many instances they were asked to leave. Why? Because the star is associated with the Israeli flag, which would make Palestinians feel unsafe. Never mind that you'll see tons of Palestinian flags at these very marches, and no one ever asked them to leave.
Yeah, and I mean we're all at a point in terms of like giving media commentary where this is kind of like a JV point to make, but there's an element of deep amusement. First of all, it's just funny. Like it's just objectively funny that if you come to a march and the basic theme is we like having sex, especially with the same sex, and you're supporting one foreign country, you just can't do that. Like there's
Right.
stringent rules for
Yeah.
who can back gay love. But like even beyond that, the support for Palestine on the quote unquote queer left is really pretty ridiculous, especially when it goes beyond like official government of Palestine flags to Hamas, the Taliban. Like all these people would literally knock you over the head and then throw you off a roof. But they are oppressed, so that can't be. Why are Muslims so homophobic? Whites taught them to hate. It's
Right.
it's the same thing. Like the
Right.
oppressor made you do this.
Yeah.
well,
Yeah, absolutely.
before, I mean, I know we're going to talk about that. Like I mentioned, you mentioned Muslims and what's happening, in other countries and how they can support things. And one thing I was going to talk about that's odd. I know they think that way. It doesn't make sense. Is am I wrong? You two pay attention to this a lot more than me. In noticing that, and I know a lot of people just don't understand about it, that it's not American, so it's not in their purview. But all of the people who seem to be concerned about, the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, all the people who are concerned about it are pro-Palestine, right? It's like all the people who are marching, all the people who are like saying that this is disgusting, all the people that want it to end, I demand a ceasefire, but they won't say anything about hostages, all seem to be that side. So it seems that obviously there must be the coalitions that you talk about. They don't tend to have much depth and much knowledge about the region or history, but that doesn't stop them. But all the other people who don't know much about it just don't say anything. So the ones who seem to be rabid about it seem to be pro-Palestinian. But at the same time, they seem to be not only not know about that conflict in depth, but I guess I'd have to say extremely unaware of the world in general, not just the Middle East, right? So they don't know, like, it's not that long ago. I'm not talking years, right? How long ago, correct me if I'm wrong, you two, but how long ago were we talking about barbecue taking over in Haiti, right? Because there was all this turmoil going on there, and this guy named Barbecue is just assumed power, right? How long ago were we? I mean, I just recently in Bangladesh, right? The PM, prime minister got ousted, and now the Hindus are under attack. We had people in Eritrea. You know, all this stuff has been going on at the same time. Nobody care. Ukraine hits the back burner. Nobody cares about any of that stuff. I mean, they're talking about the stuff in UK now, but other than that, but they're on the streets protesting for this, and they're protesting as if we have boots on the ground there, and we are the ones who are fighting. Like if there's a missile, it's the U.S. that shot the missile. So why is it that this is the only thing they seem to be to care about? Somebody must be telling them to do this.
Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I think the most simple and uninteresting one is historical anti-Semitism. I mean, if you
wait,
look throughout
I get it, but we're talking about 18-year-olds who don't even know where Israel is on the map.
No, I understand, and
so that had to come from somewhere.
Well, no, because if you look throughout history, right, you see how mob mentality works, and it doesn't. It's not like it's not like all of the forced conversions of Jews and the Holocaust and the Inquisition and the pogroms, right? It's not like every single person was an aggressive, rabid, Jew-hating freak.
Right.
It's that Jews become a scapegoat and a collective sort of, a collective mindset takes over and decides that all of the world's problems are to be blamed on this one group, whether it's the wars or, the lack of money or whatever, the rain, the leak, like in your bathroom, the rain coming through your bathroom ceiling. I mean, this is historically always how it's been with the Jews. They make up such a tiny, tiny, tiny percent of the world's population. And yet there is this microscope on them. And Israel is no different. Like you said, there are like 200 land disputes in the world. Do we ever see any marches about Northern Cyprus or Western Sahara or Nagorno-Karabakh? I mean, it's just endless. It's just endless how many disputed territories there are in the world. But this, I'm just trying to paint like a historical picture that if you understand the history of anti-Semitism and what would lead to outrage against Jews, what we're seeing now against Israel and this obsessive focus is not that different from what we've seen in history before.
Well, she's getting me closer, but I'm not quite there yet. I don't disagree with what she's saying about the history. I'm just, I guess, a cynic, and I think people are dumb. Most younger people are lazy and they rather play on their device and sit down and do nothing. So she's right about why some people are quiet. She's right about why people are buying on. Like, she's right. Everybody wasn't a rabid, anti-Semite, but they just went along. But I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the ones who are out on the street, the ones who are just firing off the angry. We have to do this, and it's all the Jews' fault. I'm like, so they had to hear it.
Well, I think I can answer that. I mean, so like I basically agree with you, Charles, that I mean, like I think as a college professor that people go to protest to like smoke pot, get laid, and fight the cops. I don't think most people like there's that famous scene where a basketball team, it's half working class white kids, it's half black kids. This is California. They're kicking in the windows of a Foot Locker during the George Floyd riots. And someone stopped, and because it was a diverse team and they all looked well groomed, they said, well, why are you guys out here passionately fighting for George Floyd? And I'm going to quote this from one of the black dudes. George Floyd, I don't know who was. It was just like they were just. It's a good chance to get the $500 Nike Dunks. This is a nice part of town. So I think that's the reason. Like you round up your boys who are of 3 different races and you go fight because that's sometimes fun and meet girls, which always is, and you go home. Steal a bottle of liquor first. That's what they're doing in England. They rob the liquor stores first, just like ethnic Americans. But so the question really though is that's why the foot soldiers go. But why are people organizing these marches specifically against Jews? Right. And why isn't there something on the other side? I think there are 3 reasons very quickly. One is just anti-Semitism. a lot of people dislike Jews. Like, it's harder to get together a crowd against, say, Polish people than it is against upper class whites or Jews or Hindus in a
Right.
Muslim country or something. So that's point
Right.
one.
Yeah,
Point
unless you're
two,
like in Russia or something, then you could probably get some
yeah,
anti-Polish
probably.
protesters.
Like, yeah, you could get a mob together against Russians
Yeah.
in Ukraine. Like,
Right.
Right.
that's a really insightful point, actually. Everyone hates people they're actually at war with.
Mhm.
Like, blacks and whites back in the day used to really dislike one another because if you went into the other group's neighborhood, especially for blacks, you'd be knocked over the head. That's
Mhm.
understandable. The question is why there are some groups, like Jews and the overseas Chinese, that
Mhm.
are often hated around the world by
Right.
people that have no beef with them.
Mhm.
And so I think one is ancient hate, anti-Semitism. It's hard to unpack, but it's there. Point two, the reason the intersectional groups are out there is that they have this really poisonous idea about the world, which is that all failure is caused by external oppression. I got in just a casual debate on Twitter the other day about a study that found that women have kinkier fantasies than men. We're not going to go into it, doesn't matter. But I mentioned this and I was just like, ha ha, Barnes and Noble and 50 Shades of Grey. And all these feminists started telling me, like, no, we think that stuff because you men make us. And it went on for like a day or two, like just nonstop. So Jews happen to be the most successful group in the world. Sorry, Parsis. Sorry, Igbo on my own black team. So there's a lot of hatred against Jews because they're seen as somehow running the world. That's the only way to get successful. You steal from other people to the communists. So that's part two. Part three, why don't you see counter marches? Like, I'll just be blunt about this. If for the same reason you don't see counter marches from black conservatives or upper class whites, like Jews tend to have jobs. So you have to have a
Interesting.
pool of
That's
people
interesting.
that you can get out in the streets.
Right.
So one, a lot of people just hate Jews, but a lot of people don't like Arabs either. I mean, just being honest. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm fine with both groups,
Right.
as you should be. But why don't you see an anti-Muslim series of riots in the USA, not in slums in Britain, following some things like the grooming gangs in our allied country, 9/11? Because the people that have a strong dislike of that group tend to be tax-paying citizens. There's much more support for Palestine among young radicals in slums and on campuses than there is for Israel. There just is.
Right.
So those are
But
the
I think
three factors I see.
right, but your second the idea that they're seeing Jews as successful, I mean, that's part of number one. That is what makes anti-Semitism such a distinct form of hatred, is it's not only a hatred that punches down, right? It's not only that Jews are inferior or, they're sons of, apes and monkeys and all those things that you've heard about Jews throughout history, but it's also it punches up. It's also what you're saying, that Jews are pulling the strings, that Jews have all the money, that Jews have all the power and the control. And so I think that's what makes it actually easier to march in these types of protests, because it's hard to identify that it's anti-Semitism when it's punching up, because you attribute, when you're, like you said, when people see, if you're seeing the world as oppressed versus oppressor, then, and the Jews are seen as the oppressor, in other situations, that's not generally a form of hatred when you're fighting against the oppressor. But that has always, always been a component of anti-Semitism, that Jews are painted as the oppressor or the manipulator or the all-powerful, right? So
The
it
one
makes
thing
it much harder to identify sometimes than other forms of hatred.
No, I think that's true. But the one thing I would add to that is that since kind of vulgar Marxism developed to full on wonk about this, I don't think that's as true. Like, I think the idea, anti Semitism still stands alone in terms of legacy, but the idea that all gaps between people are due to oppression. So anytime you see a group that's failing, you shouldn't criticize them. You should attack the group that's succeeding against them. Like, that's the basis of like Ibram Kendi's entire body of work. That's the basis of like Race to Dinner, those crazy women that go
Right.
host dinners with upper class
Totally.
white couples. Yeah.
Right.
But
But
so I mean, like,
that's why anti-Semitism has been such a fundamental component of the
yeah,
far left.
yeah,
Like,
that's a
that
really
construct.
good and accurate point. But like the same people I think in America, I don't know about Eastern Europe where the chatels bumped against the Polish farmlands, but like in America, I would bet that most of the people that hate Jews also hate white Anglos. They hate Nigerians and such and view them as kind of propsy whites. Asians, they're not too crazy about. Like, I would bet there's a whole framework where like anyone that's succeeding has learned, like the whole pick me insult for not especially feminist women, like, oh, you just have a job and you have a husband that's mostly happy with you, poor. It's just the idea that anyone who's doing well has learned the evil magic. I think that's where I would leave it. It's like,
Well, let me jump in.
Absolutely.
That's the
That's
one other thing. I agree
yeah.
with what both of you said, but the one other thing that's similar and somewhat tangential, but it still needs to be kind of pointed out separately, is that a lot of it, because what Will just said about they don't like successful Nigerians, I think he said it. They don't like whites.
Mhm.
They're anti-West,
Mhm.
right? So
Yep.
some of it can be definitely anti-Semitism too, or only, but some of it's just anything that they view as, capitalistic, Judeo-Christian, anything that's historically European, anything that's the West, right?
But
So
those
they're
things, yeah. But
right.
those things
So
aren't mutually
no,
exclusive.
they're not, without a
Like
doubt. But they can not know anything about anti-Semitism or Jews, but still fit in perfectly with those people that are aligned against all those things, because they're against everything, every lever that points to any of the things that combines all those into one larger thing.
right, absolutely. Well, they always say historically, what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews, right? I mean, and that's why you see that's you're saying these people are not just anti-Jewish, they're anti-Christian, they're anti-capitalism, they're anti-Western. It's like
Right.
if they succeeded with getting rid of Israel, you think it would stop there? Of course not.
Right.
They would move on to all their goals of burning down all the churches,
Right.
and all their crazy, Soviet, I mean, the Soviet Union is really the elephant in the room here. I mean, when we're talking about what exported this ideology to America, how was it really fostered? We have to look back to the Cold War, and we have to see the influence, as I'm sure Dr. Wiley knows so much about, that the Soviet Union had in our institutions, particular academia. And anti-Zionism was such a fundamental component of that. So the Soviet Union invented anti-Zionism. There was no such thing before the Soviet Union. And we're seeing now all of these teachers, that all these people that grew up during that time that are now teaching our kids, and they're teaching the Soviet ideology. And like you said, it's anti-Western, it's anti-Christian, and it's anti-Zionist.
Mhm.
Yeah, the one thing about this wouldn't just end with Israel, I think is fairly important, because there's always kind of that Neville Chamberlain, at least temptation, just to say, well, this doesn't matter that much. Let's sacrifice and whatever. I mean, the Arab general that fought Moshe Dayan, I forget his name, actually very famously said first what is it, the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. The idea is that the Christian West backing the Jewish state is the big enemy, and sort of Israel's the little enemy.
The little
And
Satan and the big Satan. Yeah.
yeah. And there's a famous, I think it was Douglas Murray, that was like, Britain and France, we're medium-sized Satans, teenage Satans, as it were. Like, it's a really funny, like, little clip. But yeah, the anger is not just with this one small country in the Middle East. Even the anger at the one small country in the Middle East comes from, was it General Daoud? Whatever, it doesn't matter, he lost. But I mean, even the anger at the one small country in the Middle East comes from that idea of, we are one of the other great historical civilizations. We should be beating these damned Westerners.
Mm.
How can this tiny collective of people from this bastardized faith keep kicking our ass? That's part of the passionate rage at Israel. Like, the idea is that you'll know you have the favor of Allah. And like, Muslim war leaders have said this over and over again.
Right.
When you can beat these people, this insulting pinprick in our midst. And the wealthy Arabs today, the UAE, I don't want to say civilized, the implications on both sides, but like the UAE and all of that, I mean, even the Saudis, they're signing peace deals with the Israelis.
Mhm.
I mean, so it's this sort of angry, backward group of people
Right.
looking at the successful group of people and saying, what are they doing? How are they cheating? How is Satan helping them? And that's an old evil instinct in politics.
Absolutely. Honor is such an important part of Muslim culture even today. And it's very tribal. I mean, we know that Islam is a much younger religion. It's never gone through like a reformation or anything like that. So it's still very much maybe like what Christianity was,
Okay.
before the Crusades or something like that. And the idea of weakness or losing is just, the worst thing in this culture amongst these tribes. And I think another thing that you said that was interesting, I don't remember.
But it was interesting, I'm sure.
It wasn't all that interesting, you know.
Yeah, it was moderately interesting.
Yeah.
More damned yap from me.
You know,
No.
we were talking
Mhm.
earlier, we were doing an introduction, and I was talking about how we tend to travel in some of the same circles. You know, you mentioned Free Black Thought, and you know, Adam's been on, Peter Boghossian's been on, and I was watching you talk to him, and I had to get up and clap and laugh at one point because you were talking about uh things not being binary, like the black and white, the way we see things in America and the rest of the world
Right.
doesn't see that way. And we say that often here, but more recently, I kind of got in trouble more so than Will. We talked about it, we had an episode, and then all the Kamala stuff came up afterwards. And so when I posted it, it was the whole thing about Kamala being black. So I never get attacked. So it was kind of funny to finally get attacked. But I said that Kamala Harris wasn't black. And obviously I can see her. It wasn't like I was saying that you know she doesn't fit into whatever. But we're saying what I was saying is that and it's similar to what you said about the Jews. I said that in America, when people say black, it's understood what they mean by it, right? They don't mean Jamaicans, they don't mean Nigerians, nothing. It doesn't mean if a cop stopped them, do they get profiled the same way? That's not what it means. It means when a politician gets up and shakes his finger at you and he says, you know, because of the marginalized history of blacks in America and the way they've been treated and how they've been on outsides of society, we are passing this law to true up this and to focus on equity to improve the black life, right? We all know who that politician means, right? We all know who it means. It doesn't mean somebody, regardless of
Doesn't
where they
mean
came
Kamala.
from, but it also doesn't mean a black person who got here 4 years ago, right? That's all I'm saying. It wasn't a knock against her, but I say that because
Who grew up in Montreal in an incredibly wealthy neighborhood, the
I
same
just said,
neighborhood that my father grew up in.
I didn't say it, you did, but all true. But
No, I mean, like before that lived in Berkeley, like actually really hate Kamala Harris. I mean, like if the Democrats are going to run a candidate for president, it's better that she have the nuclear codes than Joe Biden. I
she
mean,
could read
but
them at
the whole
least.
like, what's up?
I said she could read the codes at least.
Yeah, I mean, she's alive. You know, she's not gonna. That's it. Like, she's a functional, normal person from the op party, whatever. But I mean, like, the one thing that strikes me as really fake about her is the whole like civil rights gal persona.
Yeah.
Like when I was a baby, my mama took me to one of the great black civil rights marches, and the first word I ever said was freedom. And I mean, her mom was an Indian American physician. Like that just didn't happen.
Right.
So there's just many such cases. Like, yeah, she was raised in an
Black Lives Matter.
Right. But like they're arguing with, but no, seriously, they're arguing with me like, you don't think, so you're saying Jamaicans are red, but yeah, that's not what they mean. I mean, the woman literally said, you know, she grew up more of the time with her mother than her dad. She talked about going trips to India. She talked about cooking all this food. I don't really care. But let's be honest. She literally said, they asked her, because, you know, when you're a Democrat politician, you don't get asked serious questions like, what are you going to do to improve relations with, you know, Russia, to end the fight in Ukraine or do whatever. She gets asked stuff like, what do you know for cooking? What's your favorite dish? The woman said, I'm known for my greens. Her greens.
Wait, what? I don't understand. Is that
exactly? It's a Black American dish that they don't cook in Jamaica, Canada, or India. None of the people, none of the people.
So it was a virtue signal.
Look, it's the funniest thing because
She
somebody
might have made greens for Willie Brown or something. I mean, like I've made greens a bunch of times, and I'm a multiracial man.
And
you
she's
just put them in a pot with a
them.
ham hock.
And she's not famous for them. But that's the funny thing. So they're like, have you ever been to Jamaica? Whatever. Look, Jamaicans don't cook greens. Canadians don't cook greens. I'm telling you, Indians don't cook greens. She's lying to you. I'm not mad that whether you think she's black or not. Say she's fine. But it's to that point. One thing I used to say, I'm sure you know David Bernstein as well. Everybody knows David, right? So the same thing I said there, I was always telling my Jewish friends years ago, I was before my time. I said, you all should stop calling yourselves white. Stop buying into the lie that they're selling. When they say something about you, you should be like, I don't know, because I'm not white. You should just stop buying and stop saying that you're white. But now it's funny because on the one side, you're right about that. On the one side, they hate you because you're white. You're an elitist, you're white. The left is like, look at you, you're white, you're elitist. And the other side, who's racist, say they don't like you because we want pure people and you're not white.
Exactly. I mean, that's why 6 million of us were slaughtered in the Holocaust, right? Because we were not Aryan, right? We were not white, and now all of a sudden we're demonized because because we're white. But I said on that Peter Boghossian podcast, he asked me, he said, how do you identify? Like what race? And I said, Jewish.
I'm Jewish.
Like if there's
and you
no,
said you came to that, you wouldn't have said that 5, 6, 7 years ago.
yeah, because I know where I'm from and I know that we're all from the Levant and I don't care if people think I'm white, but like I mean, it's stuff. It's kind of, I don't know. It's superficial to me, but I agree with you. I mean, this whole concept of white Jews, it's just a modern day manifestation of one's own prejudice and bigotry.
And let me ask you this one other thing, unless Will, you want to say something about that?
Well, I mean, just briefly, like one of the things I'm actually kind of known for is debating what are called IQ hereditarians about race. Like there are a lot of people who think that genetics, not at the margins, but have very heavily predict, IQ and behavior by racial group. And one of the problems with this is a lot of our racial groups are just complete bullshit. So like if you're looking in like a 23andMe real sense, I mean, there's no white group. Like there's a European Caucasian group, but that includes everyone from the Slavic countries that are some of the more underdeveloped places in the world. Yeah, but I mean, like, I don't want to. They're dumb over there, but no, like I don't think that's the thing genetically, right? But I mean, like, if you look at Moldova, Albania, Bosnia, like, you're really not looking at like world-leading powers. But all those people are white; they're genetically European Caucasian. Jews are actually, if I recall, West Asian Caucasian, which includes Arabs, the MENA group of people, so on. But I mean, to actually show that whites were superior, you'd have to show that there was real similarity among people in Northern Ireland and in England and in Russia and probably in Bosnia, and almost certainly among like Jews and Arabs too, because all those people are Caucasian. There's this 2% genetic variance among them or something. So who's white doesn't really matter. Like there's this giant group of people that it might be helpful to think of as a massively extended family. And then there are like real little groups that actually share characteristics. But that's not how anyone thinks of race. Like Jews might actually. Today thinks of their race as Celtic. The white category is pretty useless. Sorry, what was that?
Oh, have you seen the that South Park episode where Stan Marsh does the 23andMe test?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's so funny. And it reminded me of what we were saying about Kamala. And I was thinking it's not just Kamala, like Biden did this. He lied. He would always, there's amazing threads about all of Biden's lies about how he grew up and the stories he concocted trying to make it sound like he was some, middle-class country boy, and then we know Elizabeth Warren and the whole Native American thing. And it reminded me of this episode, the South Park episode, where there's like a 23andMe ad, and it's advertising based on appealing to people's desire to be a victim. So it's like, what percentage victim are you? What percentage victim are you? And Stan Marsh, he's really active in the PTA, and they're trying to rename, Christopher Columbus, or get rid of Christopher Columbus Day. But then it comes out on social media that he actually like secretly has this crazy Christopher Columbus fetish. Like he is obsessed with Christopher Columbus. He like dressed up like him at his wedding and stuff like that. And so to basically prove that to defend himself, he goes and he makes out with like a Native American chief, and then he does a 23andMe test to basically show that he's part Native American.
Is he part Native American?
Well, no, but because he made out with a Native American chief, it showed up on the 23andMe test because he made out with him and then the swab, and then then he swab, so he had the DNA from the Native American, and he's like, see, I'm actually Native American.
Surprisingly PG version of that, but yeah, that's really funny.
Oh no, it gets really bad. I don't know how, I don't know what the rating is here, but at the end they like that on the show, but at the end the 23andMe administrator comes to his house, and they're like, well, there's actually a problem with your test, and we're going to have to administer this rectally. And then he like knocks on the chief's door, and you can
that's tough stuff,
there we go. Yeah, that's the South Park we all know and love. Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask you, as we talk about, since we were talking about Kamala, Kamala recently made a pick and she had a short list, and this may come as a surprise to the audience, but I have a lot of Jewish friends. And so we're sitting around the table talking.
You are a New Yorker.
This past weekend. And there was a common thread amongst the table that if Kamala, this was before the pick, did not pick Shapiro, that would be primarily because of anti-Semitism, and that a lot of liberal, not crazy left Jews would be less likely to vote for her because of that. What do you think about that, Karys?
Well, I think we just have to look at the optics and what the media focused on, right? I mean, the majority of Americans couldn't care less about really what's going on overseas. They want to put food on their table, they don't want to be, they want to have a decent salary, and they want to be able to provide for their family. And foreign policy is like the second to last, I think, priority when they poll Americans, and they've polled them like monthly in terms of what they care about for the upcoming elections. And foreign policy is consistently down at the bottom. And yet the media and the left made Josh Shapiro's entire candidacy as vice president about his support for Israel. What does that tell you about where our priorities are? America doesn't care about that. And yet the media cares and the left cares. And yeah, that's why he didn't get picked, because that created an outcry, that created outrage among Kamala's left wing base. They didn't want somebody who had said he was for the two-state solution, but had also said that Palestinians were too aggressive, or whatever it was that he said. So much so that he actually had to get on the mic and pretty much apologize for saying something that was so moderate.
That was so bad.
In its content, right? I mean, this is how we know that the Democratic Party has been hijacked, because that position that he took 2 decades ago would have been celebrated among the left. Right. So, I mean, I think I don't like the question of whether she didn't pick him because of anti-Semitism. I think we need to get more specific. Are you saying like because she's anti-Semitic? No.
Because I think the belief was that because she catered to she fell to the will of the anti-Semites in the party.
I think so. And I think like most things, the mainstream media is completely complicit in this. They amplify this issue when it should have been no issue. They should have taken the outrage among the left, over this issue and just kind of laughed at it and moved on and focused on real things that Americans care about.
I have a question for you, Will, but first, there was a second part to that, though. Do you think what do you think the reaction will be from Jewish moderates and Democrats
to her pick?
To her not picking him? If they think that anti-Semitism played a part, would they be less likely to vote for her?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the more kind of like establishment Jewish Democrats who maybe are sensitive to rising anti-Semitism and generally pro-Israel, I think they're probably very disappointed in this decision. I'm not sure if it would cause them to not vote for her, but I would not be surprised if they were considering it.
Will, I have a slightly different take. I'm sure you're probably going to disagree with me, but I don't think that there was no anti-Semitism or kind of weakening of the views, not because Kamala's anti-Semitic, but like, well, these people might be upset. That's totally true. I don't discount that. But I also believe that when people tell me they're crazy, I believe them. So while I don't think it's true, I do believe that enough people on the left think that the country is mostly racist. It's full of a bunch of racist people, right? They believe that. And they don't like any of these marginalized groups. So they had to weigh, they wanted to kind of shore up, get people to the polls through the minority focus, because they do that, right? So they wanted to do that, but at the same time, they're thinking, "Ooh, middle America won't work for this." Because think about the list. At one point, they had Shapiro, who's Jewish, right? They had Buttigieg, right? And so Pete Buttigieg, the mayor, former mayor of South Bend, yeah. And so they're looking at it like, yeah, but can we get middle? We already got a black woman on the ticket. Look, I'm sorry, I forget it. Black woman on the ticket. I forgot to air quote. So we got a black woman at the top of the ticket. Can we have another woman? Can we have another black person? Can we have a gay guy? Can we have a Jew? Right? Because the white men won't vote for them, right? So part of it may have been, and for a small percentage, I think he was on the short list because he was Jewish, right? They had a gay guy, a Jewish guy, a fat guy, good old Pritzker. They had it all on, it all on the list, right? They're like, yeah, but can we get most of the people to vote for him? Now, in the end, they probably said, yeah, as much as we need Pennsylvania, the left is going to be mad if we pick the Jewish guy, even though, like she said, he apologized for saying moderate stuff, but that wasn't good enough. So while the anti-Semitism was a part, I don't think that, I think it was just a matter of if the votes, if the white guy, the minority guy, like, look, I can't believe I'm quoting him. Charlemagne the God said it best. He's like, you want to talk about a DEI hire? Kamala's pick will be a DEI hire because she's a black woman. She needs a white man, right? And that's what it kind of, I mean, I know he's an idiot, but even idiots get it right every once in a while. Yeah. So he was saying that, if she wants to get the white male vote, yeah, you're gonna get the progressives out, but you're gonna need a white man to say, whew, at least there's somebody up there who's white, and that played a part. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the obvious problems with Shapiro was that he was a Zionist Jew. I mean, like if you're in the political science field, you're in the consulting space, which we've both been in. I mean, there've been a bunch of focus groups. I mean, like Harris met with it's called the Uncommitted Coalition or something, which has leaders that are Arab Americans from Dearborn, Michigan. I mean, like we all know what's really going on here. The idea is if you bring in someone that's a Zionist partisan, there usually are terms that are used for Jew, a Zionist partisan, a strong friend of Israel, it's going to cost you 2 or 3% of the vote. I think that's one of the top 2 or 3 reasons that Shapiro wasn't picked, if not number one. I mean, like when you say, well, Shapiro was an ethnic white guy, I don't think that most sort of centrist voters, people who'd be really interested in his pick, would care. I mean, like there are some anti-Semites, but then you get back to the fact that Harris is appealing to those anti-Semites. Like, if you're just looking at ordinary white union voters, they don't give a shit if someone's Jewish. That's like saying he's Catholic. I mean, that's a bit dated to the 80% center of the country. So I think anti-Semitism played a big role.
Well, do you think the left thinks that? They think white supremacy is everywhere, under every book and rock.
I think that the left is, if I were the Democrats, I'll give the Democrats some free advice. I would start ignoring the left in the same way the Republicans start ignoring the alt-right. If anything, the Republicans should probably listen to like the Ann Coulter section of the dissident right more than they do. I mean, the hard left in the USA, one is pretty small, it's 3 or 4%, but also doesn't vote. Like I remember talking to a passionate friend from the north side of Chicago like a couple of years ago when I was still a canvas manager about Bernie Sanders, and she was like, everyone I know is voting for Bernie, all the girls in the bars, all the working class, all the wait staff people, they're all voting for Bernie. And Bernie Sanders got slaughtered even in Chicago and certainly nationally. There was some trickery, but he also just lost in my state. And at one point, I looked up the voter turnout rate among like urban, lower class Caucasians specifically. It took like 3 or 4 days, and it was 3%, something like that, 4%. So, I mean, I think that that's what you're talking about. Like, you can't vote if you have a felony. If we're talking about like Antifa types. So, if I were Kamala Harris, I would just actually do what she did at one of her events. Like, shut up, I'm talking.
That was so funny.
Yeah, I think Shapiro was the best candidate, obviously. Anti-Semitism, personality conflict stopped it. Tim Walz, he's okay if you're a Democrat, he's a Midwestern dad type, but he's about to get hit with a massive stolen valor scandal. Just from things I've seen at the message
really?
level, like that's maybe 1/10 out of the bag.
But
So
think about it. But think about it this way. I mean, like we all know that in America, most Jews are liberal. They vote Democrat. I think it's like, I mean, it's going to be less this election than any other before, but still the majority vote Democrat. So that's a huge voting base for Kamala. And yet she meets with these, fringe uncommitted members in Michigan. And she says that she would consider, when they asked her, an arms embargo on Israel. Do you know how isolating that is to the majority of Jewish Democrats? Because the anti-Zionist Jews are also part of this fringe, this 3 to 4%, like they've done polls and upwards of like anywhere from 80 to 90% globally, because they do polls per country and they average them yearly. 80 to 95% of all Jews consider themselves Zionists. In other words, they consider Israel an important part of their identity. And so she is making decisions that when it comes to Israel and Jews, that wouldn't even necessarily benefit her in terms of the elections. There
All
has
right,
to be
but wait a
something.
minute though. Who is Kamala married to? Who's in the bedroom with her? She knows these facts that you're saying, but a lot of like Will's the guy to go to talk about how the stats tell a story. You got to get a holistic view. What you said about the percentage of the Jews that vote Democrat is 100% right, but and the percentage that most of them are consider themselves Zionists. But what we're forgetting is that many of the Jews, the secular Jews on the left, right, are a weird, odd mix. They're odd bunch. So while they will admit that they're Jewish, and they would say that identify as Zionists, but their leftism and their liberal bona fides. Earlier, we talked about those fringe groups. You mentioned all 100 groups that were anti-Semitic because they have different priorities. Well, the number one priority for those people is to beat Trump.
Right.
The number two priority is, to move the country to the left. Their personal connection and views as a Zionist are probably 4 or 5, right? So they will disagree with that, but she knows they're not going anywhere. Right. So
That's a good point.
until where you can turn, as bad as people say blacks are 90% Democrats, you can do some things to turn blacks off, right? But black women, because they're also leftists, and the leftist Jews, there's nothing you can do that would turn them away. No, I mean, you're not going to move them to Trump, Will, but there's things you can do to make them say, I'm not voting for that person, I'll sit at home.
Yeah, you can
That's
get
a big
black men and
gamble.
you can get black men and Jewish women to stay home. I mean, that's a cliche in political science. And basically, I think just if we're all going to I mean, I think the Shapiro thing was a mistake.
Yep.
And this isn't really even like, I'm generally an ally of the Jewish people or something. It was just sort of he was clearly the best candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Another issue with Shapiro might have just been that he'd overshadow Harris. Like Shapiro is a very well-known speaker, debater. People jokingly call him Ben Shapiro's brother. I mean, Harris, her main criticism is that she's kind of incoherent. So right now, her whole thing is that she sounds better than Biden and she sounds better than Trump, who's 80 his damn self. So I don't know if she wanted that guy there. So she picked this cheerful fat guy, this like Midwestern farmer, used to be a JV football coach. Like that's what we're talking about here. Right. So I mean, we'll see, but I think we all know what was going on behind the scenes.
So give us an update on what's going on in Gaza.
Oh, well, Gaza isn't even the main focal point right now. What everybody's talking about is really Hezbollah in the north, because they're expecting an imminent attack.
So like Lebanon or where?
Right. Yeah. Hezbollah is positioned in southern Lebanon.
So I was out of town when the attack happened on the soccer field. Where was that from? Right.
Is that
from them?
Exactly.
Hezbollah.
That was Hezbollah into the Golan Heights.
Yep.
It was they shot missiles into a soccer field where a group of Druze children were playing. They killed 12 and injured others. And in retaliation, Israel assassinated Hezbollah's second in command in Beirut. They also assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, which was essentially the #1 political leader of Hamas. And they did that in Tehran, which was incredibly calculated, incredibly strategic, incredibly smart, especially if you're trying to establish deterrence, right? I mean, for everybody saying, oh my gosh, the escalation, and this is going to start the war with Hezbollah, as if they haven't been shooting rockets into Israel every single day since October 7th. I mean, that's actually an incredible way to prevent escalation, because they're essentially going onto Iranian soil and saying, we can get you anywhere. I mean, this targeted killing that they completed was remarkable in how they did it. I mean, we're talking
So what you're saying
is the thing with that bombing is that, as I understand it from buddies in the military, they had apparently had a bomb in the target location for months, so knowing that some high value target would be there. And when the one showed up, they blew his head off.
That's partly true. I mean, the New York Times reported that. Now we are actually hearing reports that it's not true, that they had planted it for months, that they actually planted it the day before. But there's no doubt that they knew that Ismail Haniyeh goes to that guest house, that every time he goes to Tehran, that is one of the main places that he stays. And what we also learned from cameras, we've seen footage from TV cameras that shows that the people that ostensibly went in there and smuggled in the bomb and then came out, and it looks like they were actual members of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which you can imagine the frenzy that the Ayatollahs are in about this, right? Like thinking like, is everybody a spy? I mean, you can imagine what's going on there right now. But in terms of what's happening on the ground, so the latest, as I understand it, I didn't check too much today. I saw a few headlines, but Iran was promising a retaliation for this assassination. And the U.S. has been warning Iran about retaliating, say, you better not, or you better not hit civilians. Israel's been saying, if you hit any civilians, we are going to respond ferociously, right? So now what I'm hearing is that Tehran is actually walking it back and having second thoughts about retaliating. The new president actually, according to headlines, has told Khamenei that they shouldn't respond. And now I'm hearing that there is some discord between Hezbollah, who wants to respond, and so now Israel is thinking that Hezbollah might actually carry out some sort of attack without Tehran's consent, which would, that's sort of unprecedented.
What do you see as far as the rest of this term of, I don't know, whoever, as far as I'm concerned, Harris is president. This whole, and that's a whole nother thing that's crazy. The man said, no, I can't believe they're not forcing him to step down, but they're letting her act as she's walking off of Air Force One. She's making calls. She was at the rally the other day. The SEAL said the president of the United States. It's crazy. But what do you think the action, if it's her control, it might be a little bit better because she has reason to kind of try to manage it because she's trying to win an election. But I mean, we're not on the ground, but they go from Israel has a right to defend itself to shaking their finger at Netanyahu and saying, you need to not do that. So what do you think that they will do in the next 2 or 3 months?
Well, I have no idea because, like you said, it changes every day. I mean, we just heard Lloyd Austin say that if Tehran launches a major strike against Israel, that the U.S. would undoubtedly have Israel's back. And they sent some ships over there and everything in support and anticipation of this. So, right now it's looking good in terms of American support. Because here's the thing. I mean, Israel can fight this war in Gaza themselves. They're also fighting the Houthis. They're also fighting Hamas in the West Bank. They're also fighting Hezbollah, but they cannot, Hezbollah has 150,000 missiles pointed at Israel. Okay. And Israel cannot, they can manage a multi-front war if it's limited in scope. But once it escalates to the point where Israel's enemies are actually using their full capacity to attack it, Israel cannot do that alone. That is existentially, that could potentially be an existential war for Israel. Right. So if Israel doesn't have the West in that scenario, it would be catastrophic.
Can you imagine what that would look like if America did any kind of assistance? I mean, they tried to burn the college campuses down and chase all the Jews, and we weren't even there. We had no involvement. I'm like, what are you mad about? We haven't even done anything. So imagine, if we had to get involved, what both countries would look like at that point.
Yeah, you make a really good point that, and you said this too earlier in the conversation, that we have no boots on the ground there. And so for all this screaming about, how much aid America gives Israel and weapons and all this kind of stuff, I mean, you have to compare that to the manpower and the resources that we have in other countries, because it might even out, or it might even just be like a drop in the bucket that we give to Israel, because we don't fight Israel's wars for them. We still haven't left Germany after World War II. We still have troops there. Look at our military presence in other parts of the Middle East and in Korea, right? And in Europe. And so, I think people are a little myopic when, and I'm actually one of those Zionists. There's actually a lot more of us than people would want to believe that believes that in time after the war, there should be a decoupling in aid. It's actually I think it's not good for at least for Israel to be dependent on America's manufacturing of weapons and stuff on our soil, and Israel should be doing that on their own soil like they did before the Yom Kippur War. But regardless, that conversation about aid needs to be had in good faith, and in a sense, I know people love to say that Nikki Haley and Lindsey Graham are war hawks because they say this. But it is true when they say, in a sense, Israel is fighting America's war so that America doesn't have to, because like we were saying earlier in the conversation, these radical, these jihadist groups and these state actors like Iran, or like the Houthis, they consider America the big Satan and Israel the little Satan. And they have made it clear again and again and again that after Israel, they're coming for America. So we're kind of lucking out here. I mean, we got a good deal here, letting Israel kind of battle all of these groups on their soil, and we just have to, just support it from afar.
All right. It looks like we lost Will. I guess you bored him or pissed him off, one of the two. But one last thing I want to talk about is I'm sure I know you heard about this, but talk a bit about it so people can understand the 9 UNRWA staff members who were fired for bit. My favorite headline was from the one that said 9 staff members from the UNRWA have been terminated because it's been concluded that they may have been involved. So we concluded that they may have been involved. So tell everybody the madness that this is, because these are what they do, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's too bad that Dr. Riley left, because I know he's very interested in
he's probably trying to get this on, but
yeah, UNRWA is the United Nations Works and Relief Agency. They're the United Nations agency that is responsible for providing relief to the Palestinian Arabs. They work in the West Bank, in Gaza, and also in Lebanon and Jordan and Syria. And UNRWA, I mean, we could do a whole episode just on UNRWA, but UNRWA is as corrupt of an agency that could ever exist. Not only are they completely embedded in terms of ideology and manpower with Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other groups that are fundamentally anti-Semitic, but they also just use and abuse money like you wouldn't believe. There's scandal after scandal with nepotism and I mean, just you name it, sex for money and all this kind of crazy stuff. And yeah, they basically work hand in hand with Hamas. Like half of all of like their teachers or something, teach like a Hamas curriculum. Basically, it's like I mean, it's not Hamas's curriculum; it's the PA's curriculum. But it teaches that not just Israel, but the Jews are filthy animals and need to be wiped off the face of the earth. And it's been no secret for years and years and years that Hamas was embedded within UNRWA, and that Hamas used UNRWA's facilities, their schools, and their clinics to launch rockets and store weapons and keep hostages, right? A hostage was found in an UNRWA worker's home, I believe. But now the UN has admitted, okay, yeah, 9 of them were involved in the October 7th massacre. We know that many more of them are Hamas members, but at least the UN is admitting that there's 9 of them that, you know, that have to go. I mean, it's just, like you said, it's kind of laughable. Like, it's not even like a win. It's not even like, oh, good, these people are fired, because the
Because they
whole
fired. They're not dead. They're not in jail. They just
because
fired.
the whole organization needs to go. It needs to be disbanded. It's the single, I believe that it is the #1 entity in this conflict that is perpetuating the Palestinian refugee crisis and the war on Israel. If UNRWA, for a lot of reasons that we don't have time to get into, but if UNRWA was gone, we could actually have a chance at peace between Israel and Palestinians. So this organization needs to go. And the fact that they fired 9 people kind of allows them to save face a little bit and be like, look, we're actually doing something. We're reforming, we're cleaning up our mess, you know, like we're turning over a new leaf, you know. But really it's just all it's just a charade. I mean, it's, yeah.
Right.
That's what
Well,
I
I
think
just
about
want to put a fine point on it and make sure people understand whatever they know about the conflict. Whatever. The bottom line is 9 people have been found to be involved in a massacre and they got fired.
Right. And they are they are paid by the United Nations. They are members of this agency and they are paid to help relieve Palestinian suffering. And they are terrorists who took part in the biggest massacre in a single day of Jews since the Holocaust.
And they're not in jail. With that, we will end now, and perhaps you will come back. If for nothing else, so you can actually give a proper goodbye to Dr. Riley. But she is Karys Rhea, producer at Epoch Times, and obviously a staunch supporter of Israel, which I don't know is such an easy thing to do today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
God get all of the praise. I got a country to save because I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.